Alright, let me paint you a picture. You just stepped off a military transport. The heat hits you like a wall of wet concrete, and before you even get a chance to catch your breath, someone hands you a rifle and says, "Welcome to Vietnam." That is it. No pep talk, no map of the jungle. Just the sound of distant artillery rolling through the trees and a senior soldier next to you whispering, "Watch your step around here, rookie," and meaning every single word of it. This is not a movie. This is not one of those action-packed war stories where the hero charges through the jungle looking cool and walks away without a scratch. No, no. What you are about to hear is the raw, unfiltered reality of what your first 24 hours would actually feel like on the ground in Vietnam. And trust me, by the end of this, you are going to have a whole new level of respect for every single person who ever set foot in that jungle. So buckle up, because we are going in deep. Let us start from the very beginning. You land at Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon, and the first thing you notice is the smell. Now, people who are actually there describe it as something impossible to forget. A mix of burning fuel, tropical humidity, and something else you cannot quite place but makes your gut feel uneasy right away. The air is thick, sticky, the kind of heat that does not just sit on your skin, but pushes into your lungs like a living thing. And you have got full combat gear on. You are already sweating through everything before you even move. Now here is the thing about Vietnam that nobody really warns you about. You did not just land in a different country. You landed in a different world. Everything operates on a completely different set of rules, and the faster you figure that out, the better your chances of making it through. Does that give you chills just thinking about it? Because it should. The guys who had been there a while, they called the newcomers FNGs. That stands for something I cannot say here, but the G stands for guys, and the F and the N. Well, let us just say it was not a term of endearment. You were fresh. You were untested. And in a war zone, untested is just another word for dangerous, because a rookie who panics can get people around him hurt. So from the moment you showed up, you were watched, sized up, and the veterans were not rude about it. They were practical. They needed to know if you could hold it together when things went sideways, because things were absolutely going to go sideways. Your first hours are spent getting oriented, and orientation in Vietnam was nothing like a classroom briefing. You learn by watching. You learn by listening. And most importantly, you learn to keep your mouth shut and do exactly what the experienced soldiers around you do. One sergeant who served 2 tours described it like this. You arrive thinking you know something, and within your first hour, the jungle humbles you. And that is putting it politely. Now let us talk about the jungle itself, because this is where things get truly wild. The terrain in Vietnam, especially in the Central Highlands and along the Ho Chi Minh Trail corridor, was unlike anything most American soldiers had ever encountered. You had triple canopy jungle, which means 3 distinct layers of trees and vegetation stacked on top of each other so thick that at midday, you were walking in something close to twilight. The light barely got through. Visibility was sometimes down to 10 or 15 feet. And in that dim, dripping green world, every single step required serious focus. What do you think you would be feeling walking through something like that for the first time? Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, every bird call suddenly takes on a whole new meaning. Your brain is working overtime trying to process everything at once. And that is exactly what the environment was designed to do to you. Exhaust your senses before anything even happens. But here is where it gets really intense. The jungle was not just an obstacle, it was a weapon, and the Viet Cong knew how to use it better than anyone on the planet. The trap systems that the Viet Cong built throughout the Vietnamese jungle represent some of the most creative and terrifying defensive engineering ever seen in modern warfare. And if you were walking point, which means you were the soldier at the front of the patrol literally leading the way, encountering one of these traps was not a matter of if. It was a matter of when. Let us talk about the Punji Pit. Now this was the most well-known trap, and there is a reason it became so infamous. Soldiers would be moving through an area, and the ground would simply give way. The trap was covered with leaves, twigs, natural jungle debris, things that blended perfectly into the forest floor. Underneath, a pit dug at an angle, and inside, sharpened bamboo stakes. The stakes were sometimes treated with materials designed to cause serious infections, which meant that even if you survived the fall, the recovery was long and brutal. Now I know what you are thinking. Surely you could spot something like that from a distance, right? That is what everybody thought. And that is exactly why it worked so well. Here is the thing about those pits. The Viet Cong were not just digging holes. They were studying the way soldiers moved. They placed traps at the spots where a person walking in the jungle would most naturally step. At the base of a slope, where you naturally extend your stride. At a stream crossing, where your attention is on your footing in the water. On the other side of a fallen log, where your natural instinct is to step over and plant your foot without looking. They were thinking 3 moves ahead, like chess players in camouflage. Wild, right? Does that not blow your mind just a little bit? And the punji pit was just the beginning. The Viet Cong had a whole vocabulary of traps, each designed for a specific purpose. There was the whip trap, also called the mace, which was a bundle of sharpened bamboo spikes mounted on a bent tree or vine. When a tripwire was triggered, the bundle would whip through the air in a low arc right at knee or thigh level of a person walking the trail. The goal was not necessarily to cause immediate casualties, it was to wound. Because a wounded soldier required other soldiers to stop, secure the area, call for a medevac, and deal with the chaos. One trap could halt an entire patrol for hours. Then you had the cartridge trap, which was basically a bullet mounted in a bamboo tube at ground level, angled upward, with a nail inside. When you stepped on it, the pressure drove the nail into the cartridge primer, firing the round upward through your foot or lower leg. Simple, low-tech, brutally effective, and made entirely from materials the Viet Cong could get anywhere. Are you starting to get the picture of what moving through that jungle actually felt like? Every single step was a decision, and you had to make hundreds of those decisions every hour in heat that was pushing into the hundreds. Humidity that made you feel like you were breathing through a wet towel, with gear on your back that could weigh 60 pounds or more. Your body and your brain were both running on overdrive simultaneously. Now here is something that hits different when you really sit with it. The soldiers who had been in Vietnam for a while developed something that can only be described as a sixth sense. They started recognizing the signs. A patch of ground that looked slightly too flat. A tree that seemed to have been recently disturbed. Leaves arranged in a pattern that did not quite match the surroundings. The jungle has its own logic, and once you understood that logic, you could start reading it. But learning to read it took time, and time was a luxury that a brand new arrival did not have. On your first day, your job was simple. Stay close to the guy in front of you. Step exactly where he steps. Do not touch anything you did not need to touch. Do not lean against anything unfamiliar. Do not reach into any vegetation to push it aside without looking first. These were not suggestions. They were the difference between going home and not going home. Every soldier who spent time in Vietnam has a story about someone who did not follow one of those rules on their first day. And those stories do not have happy endings, but the traps were only part of the story. Let us talk about what the heat and the environment alone would do to you in the first 24 hours, because this part gets underestimated almost every single time. Vietnam sits in a tropical climate, and the conditions were medically dangerous regardless of any combat activity whatsoever. Temperatures regularly hit over 95 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity above 90%. Your body loses water at an extraordinary rate. Dehydration can set in faster than you expect. Heat exhaustion was one of the leading non-combat medical issues throughout the war. And water in the jungle, while seemingly everywhere, was a serious problem. Rivers, streams, standing water, all of it potentially contaminated. You needed to treat everything before drinking, and even then, waterborne illness was a constant companion for soldiers in the field. Then you had the wildlife. And before you laugh that off, let us have a real conversation about it, because the creatures in the Vietnamese jungle were not messing around. The region is home to several species of highly venomous snakes, including the banded krait and the many-banded krait, both of which are among the most toxic snakes on Earth. There was the king cobra. There were pit vipers that blended so perfectly into the jungle floor that you could be inches away before you realized you were looking at one. Soldiers were bitten. It happened with enough frequency that medical personnel always had anti-venom on hand in the field. And then there were the insects. Mosquitoes that carried malaria. Fire ants that moved in columns so thick they looked like rivers of red. Leeches in every water source that would attach themselves to exposed skin without you feeling a thing. You hearing all this? And we have not even gotten to an actual combat encounter yet. Just surviving the environment itself was already a full-time job. Now let us get to nightfall. Because if the daytime jungle was intense, nighttime in Vietnam was a completely different level. As soon as the sun dropped, the jungle transformed. The ambient light vanished almost completely. The sounds changed. Everything that was alive in that forest came out in the dark, and it was impossible to tell which sounds were animals and which sounds were something else moving through the trees. Your patrol would set up a defensive perimeter, and you would be assigned a watch shift. That meant sitting in the dark, in the jungle, listening, for hours, while trying to stay completely silent and completely alert. Experienced soldiers had a technique. Instead of staring into the darkness directly, you learned to look slightly to the side of where you wanted to focus. This is because the peripheral vision of the human eye is actually more sensitive to low light than direct vision. So you would sweep your gaze around, never looking straight at anything, always scanning slightly off angle. If something was out there moving, you would catch it in the edge of your visual field before your direct gaze would register it. That is the kind of skill you developed in Vietnam, the kind of thing you never needed in your whole life before and would never forget after. And during the night, the Viet Cong moved. They were extraordinarily skilled at movement in darkness and terrain they knew intimately. They could navigate trails at night without light, in near total silence, covering distances that would seem impossible. While American patrols tried to hold their positions quietly and wait for dawn, the Viet Cong were using the darkness as their highway. Now I want to give you a sense of what the psychological weight of all this felt like. Imagine not sleeping for 20 hours. Your body is physically exhausted from the heat and the terrain and the weight of your gear. Your senses have been at maximum alert all day, processing every sight, every sound, every smell. And now you are sitting in complete darkness, trying to stay awake and alert for your watch shift, knowing that somewhere out there in the black, people who are experts in this terrain are moving around. That kind of sustained stress does something to a person. Soldiers who went through it describe a strange state that is neither fully awake nor asleep, where you are running on pure instinct and your body is responding to signals before your conscious mind has even processed them. Veterans called it the 1,000-yard stare, that look you see in old photographs of soldiers in the field. It was not weakness. It was the expression of a mind that had been pushed to its absolute limit and was still functioning. So what made soldiers keep going through that? What made them get up the next morning and go back into that jungle? And the answer is almost universally the same whenever you ask a Vietnam veteran. It was the guy next to you, the team, the patrol, the squad. You were not fighting for abstract reasons in the jungle. You were fighting because the person beside you needed you to hold it together, and you needed them to do the same. That bond, formed under conditions of extraordinary pressure, was the thing that kept people moving forward when every sensible instinct said stop. And there is something truly remarkable about that. In a situation designed to isolate you, to exhaust you, to frighten you, the thing that cuts through all of it is human connection. The knowledge that someone has your back and you have theirs. Does not that tell you something important about people in general? Does not that give you a whole different way of looking at what soldiers carry with them long after they come home? The first 24 hours in Vietnam were not just the beginning of a military deployment. They were a total reset of a person's understanding of what they were capable of. Every comfort zone obliterated, every assumption about the world challenged. And in that crucible, something either broke or became extraordinarily strong. The soldiers who made it through, who learned the jungle, who understood the traps, who built the instincts and the bonds necessary to survive, became some of the most capable human beings in any room they ever walked into for the rest of their lives. The Vietnam War is often discussed in terms of strategy, politics, and outcomes, and those conversations matter. But the experience on the ground, in the jungle, in the heat and the dark and the silence and the fear, that is something else entirely. That is a human story. And it deserves to be told with the full weight it carries. So the next time you see a Vietnam veteran, understand that they carry in them the memory of a first 24 hours that most of us cannot begin to truly imagine. They walked into that jungle as young people with their whole lives ahead of them, and they came out the other side changed in ways that words can only approximate. They deserve every ounce of respect we can give them. And if you want to keep going deeper into stories like this one, about history, about survival, about the limits of what human beings can endure and what they find on the other side, then you are in the right place. Because around here, we do not just tell history. We live it with you. Stay with us.